Sarah Chun never planned to become a Navy SEAL. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Sacramento, she was the kind of kid who preferred books to playground fights and spent her weekends helping her grandmother tend to a small garden behind their modest house. Her parents, both immigrants from Taiwan, had built their American dream around education and quiet success. Her father worked as an accountant, her mother as a nurse, and they both believed their daughter would follow a similar path of steady, unremarkable achievement. But life is a way of reshaping people in ways they never expect. When Sarah was 15, her world changed forever during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday evening. She was walking home from the library, arms full of books for a history project, when she heard the sounds of a struggle coming from the alley behind Miller's hardware store. Most people would have kept walking, maybe called the police from a safe distance. Sarah Chun was not most people. What she found in that alley was Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who ran the corner bakery, being attacked by three men who clearly thought they had found an easy target. Mrs. Rodriguez was on the ground, her purse scattered, her face already showing the marks of violence. The men were laughing, taking their time, confident that no one would interrupt their crime. They were wrong. Sarah didn't think about her small size or her complete lack of fighting experience. She didn't consider the odds or worry about getting hurt. She saw someone who needed help, and something deep inside her simply clicked into place. Later, she would describe it as the moment she discovered who she really was beneath all the quiet politeness and academic achievements. The first attacker never saw her coming. Sarah had been taking piano lessons for 8 years, and those hours of finger exercises had given her surprising grip strength. When she grabbed the heavy brick that had fallen from the hardware store's crumbling wall, her musician's hands wrapped around it with deadly precision. The sound it made connecting with the man's skull was something she would never forget, but also something that never caused her a moment of regret. The second attacker turned toward her with a mixture of surprise and amusement. He was over 6 feet tall, probably weighed twice what she did, and clearly thought this teenage girl was going to be an easy addition to his evening's violence. He reached for her with lazy confidence, and Sarah taught him the first of what would become many hard lessons about underestimating people. She had been helping her father move furniture since she was 12, learning to use leverage and momentum instead of raw strength. When a man's hand came toward her, Sarah grabbed his wrist, planted her feet exactly where her instincts told her to, and used his own forward motion to send him face first into the brick wall with enough force to break his nose and knock out 2 teeth. The third attacker was smarter than his friends. He pulled a knife and started circling her like he knew what he was doing. This was the moment Sarah later realized had defined the rest of her life. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't panicked. She was calculating, analyzing, planning her next move with a cold clarity that surprised even her. Mrs. Rodriguez had managed to pull herself behind a dumpster, but Sarah could hear her ragged breathing and knew the older woman was badly hurt. The police sirens were still distant, too far away to matter. This man with a knife thought he had all the time in the world to finish what he had started. Sarah had grown up watching her mother work in the emergency room, and she had absorbed more medical knowledge than most people realized. She knew exactly where to hit someone to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. She knew which joints were weakest and which pressure points could drop a full-grown man in seconds. Most importantly, she knew that hesitation in a life-or-death situation was the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. When the knife came toward her, Sarah moved with a precision that would have impressed her piano teacher. She caught the man's wrist, twisted it using a technique she had seen her mother demonstrate on dislocated shoulders, and felt the satisfying snap of bones breaking. The knife clattered to the ground, and the man screamed in a way that told her she had done exactly what she intended to do. What happened next was pure instinct. Sarah picked up the fallen knife, not to attack, but to ensure the threat was completely neutralized. She pressed it against the man's throat just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood, and spoke in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "You have 30 seconds to get your friends and disappear before the police arrive. If I ever see any of you near Mrs. Rodriguez or anyone else in this neighborhood again, I will find you. And next time, I won't be nearly as gentle." The man looked into her eyes, and saw something that convinced him she meant every word. He gathered his injured companions, and they limped away into the night, leaving Sarah alone with Mrs. Rodriguez and the certain knowledge that her life had just taken a completely different direction. The police arrived 7 minutes later. The paramedics treated Mrs. Rodriguez for a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and multiple bruises, but she would make a full recovery. Sarah gave her statement with calm precision, describing exactly what had happened without embellishment or emotion. The officers were impressed by her composure and her clear recollection of events, but they were more interested in the evidence that 3 grown men had been systematically dismantled by a 15-year-old girl who weighed barely 100 pounds. Mrs. Rodriguez recovered completely, and she never forgot what Sarah had done for her. More importantly, neither did Sarah. That night in the alley had shown her something about herself that couldn't be ignored or pushed aside. She wasn't meant to live a quiet life of academic achievement and safe choices. She was meant to stand between evil and innocence, to be the person who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. Her parents were horrified when she announced her intention to join the military after high school. They had immigrated to America so their children could have opportunities they had never dreamed of, and in their minds, those opportunities involve college degrees and professional careers, not combat training and overseas deployments. Sarah understood their concerns, but she also knew they didn't understand what she had discovered about herself. She spent her remaining high school years preparing for a military career with the same methodical determination she had once applied to piano practice and history papers. She studied military history, learned everything she could about Special Operations Forces, and began a physical training that would eventually prepare her for some of the most demanding military programs in the world. She also continued to train herself in ways that weren't part of any official curriculum. Sarah sought out martial arts instructors, studied anatomy and physiology, and learned to shoot with a precision that impressed even experienced military personnel. But more importantly, she learned to control the cold clarity that had taken over during the alley fight, to access it when she needed it, and to maintain her humanity when she didn't. By the time she graduated high school, Sarah Chun had transformed herself from a quiet bookworm into something entirely different. She still maintained excellent grades and still helped her grandmother with the garden, but underneath the familiar exterior was a warrior who had been forged by necessity and refined by determination. Her recruiter, Staff Sergeant Martinez, had seen thousands of young people who wanted to join the military for various reasons. Some were running from something, others were searching for structure and purpose, and a few genuinely wanted to serve their country. But he had never met anyone quite like Sarah Chun. During their first interview, she calmly explained that she wanted to join the Navy and specifically wanted to attempt the training pipeline that led to the SEAL teams. Staff Sergeant Martinez had to suppress a smile. Sarah was 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed barely 120 pounds, and spoke in the soft, measured tones of someone who had been raised to be polite and respectful. The idea that she might survive even basic SEAL training seemed almost absurd, let alone succeed at the advanced levels that broke most male candidates. But there was something in her eyes that made him take her seriously. Sarah Chun wasn't making a whimsical decision or chasing some romantic notion of military glory. She was stating a fact about her future, delivered with the same certainty most people used when discussing the weather. Staff Sergeant Martinez had learned to trust his instincts about people, and his instincts told him that underestimating this young woman would be a serious mistake. The paperwork for her enlistment was routine, but Sarah's scores on every aptitude and psychological test were extraordinary. She demonstrated perfect recall, exceptional problem-solving abilities, and a level of emotional control that impressed even the military psychologists who had seen thousands of candidates. More telling was her performance on the stress test designed to reveal how people reacted under pressure. While other candidates became agitated, confused, or overwhelmed, Sarah became calmer and more focused. The harder the test pushed her, the more clearly she seemed to think. It was exactly the kind of response profile the military looked for in special operations candidates. but they had never seen it expressed quite so dramatically or by someone who looked quite so unlikely. Basic training was exactly what Sarah had expected. The physical challenges were demanding, but not overwhelming for someone who had spent 3 years preparing specifically for them. The mental challenges were designed to break down civilian thinking and rebuild military discipline, but Sarah adapted to the new structure with an ease that impressed her drill instructors. What surprised everyone was how she handled the social dynamics of military training. Sarah had always been quiet and somewhat reserved, but in the intensely competitive environment of basic training, she emerged as a natural leader. She didn't seek attention or try to dominate others, but when situations arose that required clear thinking and decisive action, other recruits automatically looked to her for guidance. Her drill instructors noticed this immediately. Leadership in stressful situations couldn't be taught or faked, and Sarah demonstrated it so naturally that it seemed almost effortless. She helped struggling recruits without making them feel weak. She defused conflicts before they escalated into real problems, and she maintained her own performance standards while somehow inspiring everyone around her to perform better as well. By the time basic training ended, Sarah Chun had established herself as exactly the kind of recruit the Navy wanted to see in advanced programs. Her scores were perfect, her fitness levels exceeded requirements, and her psychological profile suggested someone who would thrive under the extreme pressures of special operations training. But none of that prepared her for what she would face when she reported to BUD/S, the basic underwater demolition/SEAL training program that would determine whether she had what it took to join one of the most elite military units in the world. BUD/S was designed to break people, to find their limits, and push them far beyond what they thought was possible. The vast majority of candidates who entered the program never finished it, and those who did earned the right to call themselves Navy SEALs. Sarah arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, on a foggy Monday morning in March, carrying everything she owned in a single duffel bag. The base was intimidating in its stark functionality, designed for training warriors rather than impressing visitors. As she walked toward the building where she would begin the most challenging 6 months of her life, Sarah felt the same cold clarity settling over her that she had experienced in the alley behind Miller's hardware store. She was ready for whatever came next. What she wasn't ready for was the discovery that her greatest enemy wouldn't be the physical challenges of SEAL training, the mental pressure designed to break her spirit, or even the possibility of failure and injury that hung over every candidate. Her greatest enemy would be wearing the same uniform she wore, and he would be someone who was supposed to be on her side. The first thing Sarah noticed about Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison was that he never looked directly at her. During the initial briefing for BUD/S Class 247, Morrison stood at the front of the room with the other instructors, his eyes scanning the assembled candidates with professional assessment. When his gaze reached Sarah, it simply moved past her, as if she wasn't there, as if her presence was so unlikely that acknowledging it would be a waste of time. Morrison was exactly what most people pictured when they thought about Navy SEALs. 6 feet 2 inches of solid muscle, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh environments doing dangerous things. His service record was impressive. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, with commendations for valor and leadership that marked him as exactly the kind of operator the SEAL community valued most highly. He was also, Sarah realized within the first week of training, going to be a problem. BUD/S training was legendary for its brutality, designed to push human beings to their absolute limits and beyond. The instructors weren't there to encourage or coddle. They were there to find weaknesses and exploit them, to create situations so difficult that only the strongest and most determined candidates would survive. This wasn't personal. It was professional, a systematic process for ensuring that only the best of the best earned the right to wear the SEAL trident. But what Morrison was doing to Sarah went far beyond professional evaluation. It was systematic, personal, and designed not just to test her limits, but to destroy her completely. It started small, with the kind of harassment that could easily be dismissed as normal instructor behavior. During physical training, Morrison would single Sarah out for extra attention, making her repeat exercises while the rest of the class moved on. When she completed the required number of push-ups perfectly, he would claim her form was wrong and make her start over. When she finished an obstacle course run in record time, he would find imaginary infractions that required her to run it again. Sarah understood that this was part of the process. SEAL training was supposed to be unfair, supposed to push candidates beyond what they thought they could endure. She accepted Morrison's extra attention as a challenge to overcome, another obstacle between her and her goal. What she didn't initially understand was that Morrison's treatment of her was fundamentally different from the pressure he applied to other candidates. The other instructors pushed everyone to their limits, but they did so with professional detachment and clear purpose. When a candidate failed to meet standards, they received immediate feedback and an opportunity to improve. When someone showed weakness, the instructors applied pressure designed to help them find hidden strength. The goal was always to build better warriors, even if the process was brutally difficult. Morrison's treatment of Sarah served no training purpose. He wasn't trying to make her stronger or more capable. He was trying to make her quit. And as the weeks progressed, his methods became increasingly obvious to everyone who witnessed them. During water confidence training, where candidates had to demonstrate their ability to remain calm in potentially drowning situations, Morrison made Sarah repeat exercises that other candidates only had to complete once. When she performed perfectly, he claimed she had panicked and forced her to start over. During a particularly challenging exercise where candidates' hands and feet were bound while they treaded water, Morrison held Sarah underwater for several seconds longer than the standard time, pushing her to the very edge of unconsciousness before allowing her to surface. The other candidates began to notice. Marcus Williams, a former college football player from Texas, quietly mentioned to Sarah that Morrison seemed to have it in for her. Tommy Chun, a Marine Corps veteran who shared no relation to Sarah despite their common last name, started timing Morrison's exercises and documenting the differences in how Sarah was treated compared to everyone else. But it was David Park, a soft-spoken medic from Oregon, who finally put into words what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say directly. "He's trying to kill you," David told Sarah one evening after a particularly brutal training session. They were sitting in the barracks, both exhausted beyond the point where normal conversation was possible. Not literally, maybe, but close enough. What he's doing isn't training. It's hazing at best, assault at worst. Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but hearing someone else say it made the situation suddenly, starkly real. Morrison wasn't just a demanding instructor who happened to push her harder than others. He was deliberately trying to force her out of the program through methods that went far beyond accepted training standards. The question was what to do about it. Sarah could file a complaint through official channels, but that would effectively end her SEAL career before it began. The military, despite official policies about equal treatment and harassment, still operated on unofficial codes that made complainers unwelcome. A female candidate who accused a decorated instructor of improper treatment would be labeled a troublemaker, someone who couldn't handle the pressure and try to blame others for her failures. More importantly, Sarah realized that complaining would prove Morrison's point. He clearly believed that women didn't belong in special operations units, that they would eventually find some excuse to avoid meeting the same standards as male candidates. If she ran to the chain of command for protection, she would be confirming his prejudices and ensuring that future female candidates would face even more resistance. So Sarah decided to endure. She would meet every challenge Morrison threw at her, exceed every impossible standard he set, and prove through performance that his treatment of her was based on bias rather than legitimate training concerns. It was a strategy that required not just physical strength and mental toughness, but a level of emotional control that few people possessed. For 3 months, Sarah survived Morrison's systematic campaign to destroy her. She completed every exercise he assigned, met every artificially inflated standard he imposed, and maintained her composure even when his treatment became so obviously discriminatory that other instructors began to notice and quietly distance themselves from his methods. But Morrison was not finished with her. As it became clear that Sarah would not quit voluntarily, that she was not only surviving his harassment, but actually thriving despite it, his methods became more desperate and more dangerous. During Hell Week, the legendary 5-day period where candidates were allowed only 4 hours of sleep total, while completing continuous physical and mental challenges, Morrison's treatment of Sarah escalated to levels that bordered on attempted murder. Hell Week was designed to be the ultimate test of a candidate's will to continue. The physical challenges were secondary to the mental pressure. The program wanted to see who would keep going when every rational part of their mind was screaming at them to quit. Most candidates who survived Hell Week discovered reserves of determination they never knew they possessed. Sarah discovered that Morrison was willing to risk his own career to ensure she didn't survive it. On the third night of Hell Week, during a beach exercise that required candidates to work in teams carrying heavy logs through freezing surf, Morrison assigned Sarah to a team with the 4 smallest male candidates. This meant they were carrying the same weight as teams composed of much larger men, but with significantly less strength to distribute the load. It was a setup designed to ensure failure. When Sarah's team began to fall behind the others, Morrison used their struggles as an excuse to impose additional punishment exercises. While other teams rested between log carries, Sarah's team was forced to perform endless sets of push-ups, sit-ups, and burpees in the freezing sand. When hypothermia began to set in among her teammates, Morrison denied them permission to warm up with the heaters provided for candidates, showing signs of dangerous body temperature drops. It was David Park who finally intervened, quietly approaching the senior instructor to point out that several candidates were showing signs of serious hypothermia. The senior instructor, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, immediately called for a medical evaluation and ordered emergency warming procedures for the affected candidates. But Morrison wasn't finished. As Sarah and her teammates were being treated for hypothermia, Morrison approached her with an expression of cold satisfaction. "This is what happens when people try to play games they're not equipped for," he said quietly, ensuring that only Sarah could hear him. "You're going to get people killed with your selfish need to prove something. How many of your teammates have to suffer because you won't accept reality?" Sarah looked at Morrison with the same cold clarity that had taken over during the alley fight years earlier. She was exhausted, hypothermic, and pushed to the very edge of human endurance, but her mind was perfectly clear about what was happening and why. "I'm not the one putting my teammates in danger," she replied, her voice steady despite her chattering teeth. "You are, and we both know it." Morrison's face darkened with genuine anger. Up until that moment, Sarah had maintained perfect military courtesy despite his treatment of her, never responding to his provocations or giving him any excuse to take official action against her. Her quiet accusation was the first time she had directly challenged his authority, and Morrison clearly interpreted it as a declaration of war. "We'll see about that," Morrison said. "We'll see exactly what you're made of." Sarah survived Hell Week. Despite Morrison's efforts to create impossible situations, despite the additional challenges and arbitrary punishments, despite the systematic campaign to break her physically and mentally, she crossed the finish line with her class and earned the right to continue in the SEAL training program. But her troubles with Morrison were far from over. If anything, her success only intensified his determination to prove that she didn't belong in the SEAL community. Having failed to break her during the most challenging phase of BUD/S training, Morrison began to focus on more subtle forms of sabotage. He started questioning her performance in ways that were harder to document, but just as damaging. During shooting exercises, he would claim her targets were mismarked even when other instructors confirmed perfect scores. During tactical exercises, he would change mission parameters at the last minute, then criticize her for failing to adapt to information she had never received. Most insidiously, Morrison began to work on Sarah's classmates, subtly suggesting that her presence was making the program more dangerous for everyone. He would point to minor mistakes made by other candidates and suggest they were caused by the distraction of having a female in the class. He would question whether Sarah was really meeting the same standards as everyone else, implying that other instructors were giving her special treatment to avoid controversy. Sarah realized that Morrison's strategy had evolved beyond simply trying to force her quit. He was now trying to turn her classmates against her, to create an environment where she would be isolated and unsupported even if she managed to complete the training program. It was a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, and it was beginning to work. Some candidates who had previously been friendly and supportive began to distance themselves from Sarah. Others started to question whether her performance was really as good as it appeared, whether Morrison might be right about the special treatment. The breaking point came during advanced combat training, when candidates were learning close-quarters fighting techniques that would be essential for SEAL operations. The training was conducted under high-stress conditions, with instructors creating scenarios designed to test candidates' ability to think clearly and react appropriately under extreme pressure. Morrison had designed a specific scenario for Sarah, one that placed her in a simulated capture situation where she would be required to resist interrogation and attempt escape. The scenario was more intense than anything the male candidates faced, involving prolonged stress positions, sensory deprivation, and psychological pressure techniques that pushed the boundaries of acceptable training methods. Sarah endured 6 hours of simulated captivity, maintaining her resistance despite techniques that bordered on actual torture. When she finally succeeded in the escape portion of the exercise, Morrison seemed genuinely frustrated by her success. That evening, as Sarah was cleaning her equipment in the armory, Morrison approached her alone. The other candidates had finished their maintenance and returned to the barracks, leaving Sarah isolated with the man who had spent months trying to destroy her military career. "You think you've won something," Morrison said, his voice carrying a menace that went far beyond normal instructor intimidation. "You think surviving my training means you belong here." Sarah continued cleaning her weapon, maintaining the professional composure that had carried her through months of harassment. "I think I'm doing my job, Petty Officer Morrison. Same as everyone else." Morrison stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that would have been inappropriate between any instructor and candidate, but felt particularly threatening given their history. "Let me explain something to you," Morrison continued. "This isn't about equal rights or proving a point. This is about life and death in situations you can't even imagine. When a shooting starts and your teammates need someone they can count on, your politics and your feelings don't matter. Only results matter." Sarah finally looked up from her weapon, meeting Morrison's gaze directly for the first time in months. "Then, judge me on my results, not on your assumptions about what I can't do." Morrison's expression shifted, and Sarah realized that her calm defiance had finally pushed him past the point of professional control. What happened next would define not just her military career, but her understanding of how far some people would go to protect their prejudices. "You want to be treated like everyone else?" Morrison asked. "Fine. Let's see how you handle a real test." What Morrison had in mind was not part of any official training curriculum. It was personal revenge disguised as military instruction, and it would force Sarah to choose between her military career and her basic human dignity. The choice Morrison was about to offer her would seem impossible to anyone who didn't understand the depth of her commitment to becoming a SEAL. But Sarah Chun had learned something important about herself in an alley behind Miller's hardware store, and she was about to remind Morrison of what happened when people underestimated quiet strength. Morrison's real test came the following Friday evening, during what was officially designated as a team-building exercise for the remaining candidates in BUD/S Class 247. Only 18 of the original 47 candidates remained, and the instructors had planned what they called a stress inoculation event designed to test candidates' ability to maintain unit cohesion under extreme pressure. Sarah should have recognized the setup immediately. The exercise was scheduled for after normal training hours, in a remote section of the base, where other personnel were unlikely to witness or interfere with whatever Morrison had planned. The other instructors who normally supervise training events were conspicuously absent, leaving Morrison in charge of a scenario that he had apparently designed himself. The remaining candidates were told to report to Building 47, a windowless concrete structure that was normally used for storage. When they arrived, they found the building had been cleared and rearranged to resemble a mock interrogation facility, complete with chairs, restraints, and equipment designed to create psychological pressure without technically crossing the line into prohibited training methods. Tonight, we're going to explore what happens when the enemy captures one of your teammates," Morrison announced to the assembled candidates. His voice carried the same professional tone he used during normal training, but Sarah noticed something different in his expression, a satisfaction that seemed too personal for a routine exercise. "Each of you will take turns playing the role of captured operative while your teammates attempt a rescue mission. The exercise will test your ability to resist interrogation, maintain operational security, and work together under the kind of pressure you'll face in real-world situations." The scenario sounded legitimate, even if the timing and location were unusual. Sarah had participated in similar exercises during earlier phases of training, and they were recognized as valuable preparation for the kinds of situations SEAL operatives might actually face in hostile environments. But as the exercise began, it became clear that Morrison had designed something that went far beyond normal training parameters. The male candidates were subjected to standard stress techniques, uncomfortable positions, loud noises, bright lights, and verbal intimidation designed to test their mental resilience. The rescue missions were challenging but achievable, with clear objectives and reasonable time limits. When Sarah's turn came, everything changed. Morrison had arranged for her to be the final candidate tested, ensuring that she would face the exercise when everyone was already exhausted and their judgment compromised by hours of high-stress training. As her classmates prepared for the rescue scenario, Morrison personally secured Sarah to a chair using restraints that were significantly more restrictive than anything the other candidates had experienced. "Your teammates have 30 minutes to locate and extract you," Morrison explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lecture rather than supervising a training exercise. "During that time, you'll be questioned about classified information that enemy operatives might try to extract from a captured SEAL. Your job is to resist interrogation using appropriate techniques while maintaining hope that rescue is coming." What Morrison didn't explain was that he had given Sarah's teammates false information about the exercise timeline and objectives. While Sarah believed she needed to resist for 30 minutes, her classmates had been told they had 2 hours to plan and execute their rescue attempt. This meant Sarah would be left alone with Morrison for 90 minutes before any rescue attempt would even begin. It was a sophisticated setup designed to create exactly the kind of isolated situation Morrison needed to escalate his harassment beyond anything that could be justified as legitimate training. The first 30 minutes followed something resembling normal interrogation resistance protocols. Morrison questioned Sarah about fictional classified information while using approved stress techniques to test her mental resilience. Sarah responded according to her training, providing only name, rank, and serial number while maintaining the kind of professional composure that had carried her through months of BUD/S training. But when the 30-minute mark passed with no sign of rescue, Sarah realized she was facing something entirely different from a standard training exercise. Morrison's questions became more personal, focusing not on military information, but on her motivations for joining the SEAL program, her relationships with other candidates, and her feelings about the treatment she had received during training. "Do you really think your teammates are coming for you?" Morrison asked, circling her chair like a predator evaluating prey. "Do you think they care enough about having you on their team to risk their own success in this program?" Sarah maintained her professional composure, but she was beginning to understand the true nature of Morrison's plan. This wasn't about interrogation resistance or team building. This was about psychological destruction, designed to convince her that she was isolated, unwanted, and ultimately disposable. "Let me tell you what your teammates are really thinking," Morrison continued. "They're relieved to have a break from your presence. They're tired of watching instructors focus extra attention on you. They're tired of wondering whether you're really meeting the same standards they are, or whether you're getting special consideration because the program is afraid of bad publicity." The words were carefully chosen to exploit every insecurity and doubt that any candidate in Sarah's position might feel. Morrison had clearly spent considerable time analyzing her psychological profile, looking for weaknesses he could leverage to break her mental resilience. But Morrison had made a fundamental miscalculation about Sarah Chen's character. The quiet strength that had sustained her through months of harassment wasn't based on other people's approval or acceptance. It came from an internal certainty about her own capabilities and worth that no amount of external pressure could shake. "You're wasting your time, Petty Officer Morrison," Sarah said calmly. "Nothing you say is going to make me quit, and nothing you do is going to change the fact that I belong here as much as any other candidate." Morrison's expression darkened with genuine anger. Sarah's continued composure was clearly frustrating his attempts to break her psychologically, and he was beginning to realize that conventional intimidation tactics weren't going to achieve his goals. "You think you're strong," Morrison said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more menacing than shouting. "You think surviving my training makes you special. But strength isn't about enduring punishment. It's about protecting the people who depend on you." Morrison moved to a table that Sarah hadn't noticed earlier, covered with a cloth that he now pulled away to reveal an array of tools and devices that had nothing to do with standard military training. Some appeared to be improvised weapons. Others looked like torture implements designed to cause pain without leaving obvious evidence. "Here's your real test," Morrison continued. "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to keep hurting you until you admit that you don't belong in this program and agree to submit a voluntary withdrawal request. Your teammates aren't coming because they don't know where you are. The other instructors aren't coming because they think this is a legitimate training exercise. It's just you and me, and I have all the time in the world." Sarah felt the same cold clarity settling over her that had taken control during the alley fight years earlier. Morrison had finally dropped all pretense of legitimate training and revealed his true intentions. This wasn't harassment or even hazing. It was assault with the intent to cause serious bodily harm. And Sarah was going to have to defend herself using whatever means necessary. "You can do this the easy way or the hard way," Morrison said, selecting what appeared to be an improvised electrical device from his collection of tools. "Admit you don't belong here and sign the paperwork or find out exactly how much pain you can endure before you break." Sarah tested the restraints holding her to the chair and realized that Morrison had made his second serious miscalculation of the evening. The restraints were designed to restrict movement during a normal interrogation scenario, but they weren't sufficient to completely immobilize someone with Sarah's knowledge of anatomy and leverage. More importantly, Morrison had positioned himself within reach of someone who had spent 3 years learning exactly how to neutralize larger, stronger opponents using techniques that didn't require brute strength. "I need to ask you something before we continue," Sarah said, her voice maintaining the same calm professionalism she had used throughout the evening. "Are you acting under official orders? Or is this your personal initiative?" Morrison seemed surprised by the question, perhaps interpreting Sarah's calm demeanor as evidence that she was finally beginning to break under pressure. "This is about maintaining unit integrity," Morrison replied. "This is about ensuring that people who can't handle the real pressures of special operations don't put good operators at risk." "So this is personal," Sarah said. "This isn't about training standards or legitimate military concerns. This is about your personal belief that women don't belong in combat units, and you're willing to commit assault to enforce that belief." Morrison's expression shifted as he realized that Sarah's calm questioning wasn't a sign of submission, but rather the methodical preparation of someone who was about to take decisive action. "It doesn't matter what you call it," Morrison said, moving closer with the electrical device in his hand. "What matters is that you're going to learn what real combat feels like, and you're going to realize you don't have what it takes to protect the operators who will depend on you." Morrison reached towards Sarah with the device, confident that she was secured and helpless. It was exactly the kind of overconfident approach that Sarah had been hoping for, and exactly the kind of mistake that people made when they underestimated quiet strength. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but would be replayed in slow motion in Morrison's memory for the rest of his life. Sarah had been testing the restraints throughout their conversation, not trying to escape, but rather calculating exactly how much freedom of movement she had and how to use it most effectively. When Morrison moved within range, Sarah used a technique she had learned from studying both martial arts and her mother's medical knowledge. The human knee joint, Sarah had learned, could withstand enormous pressure when force was applied along its natural range of motion. But when force was applied from the side, particularly with his sudden twisting motion, even a relatively small person could cause catastrophic damage. Sarah's right leg was partially restrained, but she had enough range of motion to drive her shin directly into the side of Morrison's left knee while simultaneously twisting her body to add rotational force to the impact. The sound of Morrison's leg breaking was audible throughout the building. A sharp crack followed immediately by Morrison's scream of pain and shock. Morrison collapsed to the floor, his electrical device clattering away harmlessly, clutching his destroyed knee while trying to understand what had just happened. Sarah used his moment of shock and pain to work her way out of the restraints, which proved much easier now that Morrison wasn't watching her every movement. But Morrison's injury, while severe, hadn't incapacitated him completely. As Sarah stood up from the chair, Morrison reached for a weapon he had apparently kept concealed, a combat knife that was definitely not part of any legitimate training exercise. "You just ended your military career," Morrison gasped through his pain. "Assaulting an instructor is grounds for court-martial, and I'm going to make sure you spend the next 10 years in military prison." Sarah looked at Morrison with the same expression she had used when confronting the knife-wielding attacker in the alley years earlier. Morrison was injured, armed, and desperate, which made him extremely dangerous despite his compromised position. "The only person who committed assault tonight was you," Sarah replied. "And you're about to learn what happens when someone pushes me too far." Morrison tried to stand, using the knife to support his weight while keeping the blade pointed towards Sarah. It was exactly the kind of threatening gesture that Sarah had been trained to neutralize, and exactly the kind of mistake that would justify whatever action she needed to take to protect herself. But before Sarah could act, the building's main door burst open and her 18 classmates poured in, followed by Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez and 2 other senior instructors who clearly hadn't expected to find the scene they were witnessing. Morrison was on the floor with an obviously broken leg, holding a combat knife in a threatening manner, while Sarah stood over him looking perfectly calm and completely in control of the situation. The improvised torture devices were clearly visible on the nearby table, and the restraints that had been used to secure Sarah were hanging from the chair in a way that told an obvious story about what had been happening. "Stand down, Morrison," Chief Rodriguez commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Drop the weapon and do not move." Morrison looked around at the assembled witnesses and realized that his carefully planned scenario had collapsed completely. Whatever explanation he had prepared for Sarah's eventual injuries would be impossible to maintain given the evidence and the number of people who could now testify about what they had observed. But Morrison wasn't finished yet. With the desperate fury of someone who realized his career was over regardless of what happened next, he made one final attempt to destroy the woman who had resisted his campaign of harassment and violence. "She's lying," Morrison shouted, his voice breaking with pain and desperation. "Whatever she told you, she's lying. She attacked me during a legitimate training exercise and broke my leg for no reason." Sarah looked at Morrison with something approaching pity. Even now, with his career and freedom hanging in the balance, Morrison was still trying to play the victim rather than accept responsibility for his actions. "Chief Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone stating simple facts. "Petty Officer Morrison attempted to assault me with electrical devices after restraining me under false pretenses. When I defended myself, he escalated the situation by threatening me with a combat knife. Everything that happened here tonight was captured on the building's security cameras, and I'm confident that the recordings will support my account of events." Sarah was bluffing about the security cameras. She had no idea whether the building was monitored, but Morrison's expression told her that the bluff had worked. Morrison clearly knew something about the building's surveillance capabilities that made Sarah's claim plausible. Chief Rodriguez looked at the evidence around the room, assessed the relative credibility of the 2 stories he was hearing, and made a decision that would determine the future of everyone involved. "Morrison, you're under arrest," Chief Rodriguez announced. "Medical personnel are en route to treat your injury, and you'll be transferred to the brig as soon as you're medically stable." Morrison's face crumpled with the realization that his military career was over and that he would likely face serious criminal charges for his actions. But Even in defeat, he couldn't resist one final attempt to drag Sarah down with him. "This isn't over," Morrison said, his voice barely audible. "You think you've won something, but this is just the beginning. You'll never be accepted, never be trusted, never be anything more than a diversity hire who got special protection when things got tough." Sarah looked at Morrison for the last time, seeing not a decorated warrior, but a broken man whose prejudices had destroyed everything he had worked to achieve. "You're wrong," Sarah said simply. "But it doesn't matter anymore because you'll never be in a position to find out." The aftermath of Morrison's arrest sent shockwaves through the entire naval special warfare community. Word of what had happened during the so-called training exercise spread through military channels with the kind of speed that only truly extraordinary events achieved. Within 48 hours, investigators from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service were conducting interviews with every candidate, instructor, and staff member who had any connection to BUD/S Class 247. Sarah found herself at the center of an investigation that would ultimately reshape policies and procedures throughout the special operations community. But her immediate concern was simpler and more personal. Would she be allowed to continue her training, or would the controversy surrounding Morrison's actions result in her removal from the program for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual performance? Chief Rodriguez provided the answer during a private meeting in his office on the Monday following Morrison's arrest. Sarah had spent the weekend in a strange state of suspension, unsure whether she should continue preparing for the next phase of training or begin planning for a return to conventional Navy service. "I want you to know that your status in this program has never been in question," Chief Rodriguez told her, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made argument impossible. What happened with Morrison was the action of one individual who violated everything this program stands for. It has no bearing on your qualifications, your performance, or your future as a SEAL candidate. Sarah felt a relief that she hadn't fully realized she needed. The past months of harassment had created a constant background stress, a nagging doubt about whether her presence in the program was causing more problems than her performance could justify. Chief Rodriguez's clear statement removed that uncertainty completely. However, Chief Rodriguez continued, "I need to prepare you for what comes next. Morrison's actions are going to generate significant attention, both within the military and in the media. There will be people who try to use this incident to argue that women shouldn't be in special operations programs, that your presence created the conditions that led to Morrison's breakdown." Sarah had already considered this possibility. Morrison's supporters, and she was certain he had supporters among people who shared his views about women in combat, would try to frame the incident as evidence that integrating special operations units created dangerous complications. "I understand, Chief," Sarah replied. "I'm prepared to deal with whatever attention this brings." Chief Rodriguez studied her for a moment, apparently satisfied by what he saw in her expression. "I believe you are," he said. "But I want you to understand that your response to this situation will be watched by people throughout the military. How you handle the pressure, how you perform under increased scrutiny, how you interact with classmates who might have complicated feelings about what happened. All of that will influence policies that affect every woman who comes after you." The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but Sarah had been carrying it unconsciously since the day she decided to pursue SEAL training. She was a pioneer whether she wanted to be or not, and her success or failure would influence opportunities for countless other women who shared her ambitions. "I won't let anyone down, Chief," Sarah said. "Not you, not this program, and not the women who come after me." Chief Rodriguez nodded, clearly satisfied with her response. "I know you won't. Now, let's talk about completing your training." Sarah returned to BUD/S training with a renewed sense of purpose and a significantly different relationship with her classmates. Morrison's arrest had forced everyone in Class 247 to confront the reality of what Sarah had been enduring for months, and their reactions revealed both the best and worst aspects of military culture. Most of her classmates expressed genuine shock and support. They had known that Morrison was treating Sarah differently, but they hadn't understood the extent or the malicious intent behind his actions. Learning that a decorated instructor had been willing to commit assault to force a candidate out of the program challenged their assumptions about military professionalism and forced them to reconsider their own responses to the harassment they had witnessed. Marcus Williams, the former college football player from Texas, approached Sarah privately to offer an apology that she hadn't expected but found deeply meaningful. "I knew Morrison was riding you harder than the rest of us," Marcus said, his usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. "I thought it was just his way of testing you, seeing if you could handle extra pressure. I should have realized it was something worse, and I should have said something." Sarah appreciated the apology, but she was more interested in what it revealed about the culture she was trying to join. "What stopped you from saying something?" she asked. "Even if you thought it was just extra testing, you could see it was unfair." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Honestly, I was afraid of making things worse for you, and I was afraid of making things worse for myself. Morrison had a reputation as someone you didn't cross, and I thought challenging him would hurt both of us without actually helping the situation." It was an honest answer that Sarah respected, even though it revealed the kind of institutional weakness that allowed harassment to flourish. Marcus and others had chosen self-preservation over basic principles of fairness, creating the environment Morrison needed to escalate his campaign against her. But Sarah also understood that expecting individual candidates to challenge powerful instructors required a level of moral courage that was separate from the physical and mental toughness needed to complete SEAL training. Morrison's arrest had demonstrated that even decorated warriors could succumb to prejudice and poor judgment, and expecting candidates to police instructor behavior placed an unfair burden on people who were already under enormous pressure. Tommy Chun, the Marine veteran, had a different perspective on the situation. "I documented everything Morrison did to you," Tommy told Sarah during one of their evening equipment maintenance sessions. "Times, dates, witnesses, everything that seemed outside normal training parameters. I was planning to submit a report after graduation, but Morrison's arrest made that unnecessary." Sarah was surprised by Tommy's methodical approach to the problem. While she had been focused on enduring Morrison's harassment and proving her capabilities through performance, Tommy had been quietly building a case that could have been used to address the situation through official channels. "Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" Sarah asked. Tommy smiled grimly. "Because I thought you'd tell me to stop. You were so focused on proving you could handle whatever Morrison threw at you that I didn't think you'd want anyone else fighting your battles for you." Tommy was right. Sarah would have asked him to stop documenting Morrison's behavior, not because she didn't appreciate the support, but because she needed to prove to herself and everyone else that she could succeed despite the obstacles rather than by having them removed. But the most significant response came from David Park, the soft-spoken medic who had been the first to recognize that Morrison's treatment of Sarah went beyond normal training parameters. "I failed you," David said simply. "I knew what Morrison was doing was wrong. I knew it was dangerous, and I didn't take action to stop it. That makes me partially responsible for what happened." Sarah found David's acceptance of responsibility both admirable and troubling. She didn't want her classmates to feel guilty about Morrison's actions, but she also recognized that David was identifying a real problem with how the military community responded to obvious abuse of authority. "You're not responsible for Morrison's choices," Sarah told David. "But I appreciate that you recognize the importance of speaking up when you see something wrong." David nodded, but Sarah could see that he was still struggling with his own response to the situation. "I want you to know that if anything like this ever happens again, to you or anyone else, I won't hesitate to take action. Morrison's arrest taught me that sometimes being a good teammate means risking your own position to protect others." The conversations with her classmates revealed that Morrison's arrest had forced everyone in the program to confront questions about leadership, moral courage, and the responsibility that comes with belonging to an elite military unit. Sarah realized that Morrison's campaign against her had inadvertently created a teaching moment that would influence how these future SEALs approach similar situations throughout their careers. But not everyone in Class 247 responded to Morrison's arrest with support and self-reflection. 3 candidates, Kevin Brooks, Mike Sullivan, and James Martinez, began to distance themselves from Sarah in ways that suggested they blamed her for the controversy surrounding the program. Sarah first noticed the change during team exercises that required close cooperation and communication. Brooks, Sullivan, and Martinez began to exclude her from planning discussions, provide incomplete information about mission parameters, and generally treat her as if she were a security risk rather than a trusted teammate. The subtle ostracism was in some ways more challenging than Morrison's overt harassment. Morrison's actions had been clearly wrong, making them easy to identify and resist. But her classmates' behavior existed in a gray area between legitimate military judgment and improper treatment, making it difficult to address without seeming oversensitive or paranoid. The situation came to a head during a complex navigation exercise that required teams of 4 to locate multiple checkpoints using only map and compass while carrying heavy equipment loads. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Brooks, Sullivan, and Martinez, an arrangement that she suspected was not coincidental. From the beginning of the exercise, Sarah's teammates made it clear that they didn't trust her judgment or want her input on tactical decisions. When she identified navigational errors that would have cost the team valuable time, her suggestions were ignored. When she offered to take point during difficult terrain crossings, her teammates insisted on maintaining their own formation despite her superior navigation skills. The exercise required 12 hours to complete, and Sarah spent most of that time watching her team make preventable mistakes while being excluded from the decision-making process that could have avoided them. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive harassment, designed to undermine her confidence and isolate her from the team dynamics that were essential for special operations success. Sarah completed the exercise without complaint, but she also made a decision about how to handle the ongoing attempts to undermine her position in the program. She was tired of being reactive, tired of simply enduring whatever obstacles were placed in her path. It was time to demonstrate leadership in a way that would force people to acknowledge her capabilities rather than their assumptions about her limitations. The opportunity came during the final phase of BUD/S training, when candidates were required to plan and execute complex mission scenarios that tested everything they had learned throughout the program. Sarah volunteered to lead a particularly challenging scenario, a simulated hostage rescue that required precise coordination between multiple teams operating in different environments. Leading the mission would put Sarah in a position where her classmates would have to follow her orders and trust her judgment, regardless of their personal feelings about her presence in the program. It would also demonstrate her tactical thinking and leadership abilities to the instructors who would ultimately decide whether she earned the right to continue in advanced SEAL training. Chief Rodriguez approved Sarah's request to lead the mission, but he also provided a warning that revealed how much attention her performance continued to receive from senior leadership. This exercise will be observed by personnel from Naval Special Warfare Command, Chief Rodriguez told her. Your performance will be evaluated not just for your own advancement, but as data for ongoing discussions about women in special operations roles. Sarah understood the implication. This wasn't just about her individual success or failure. It was about proving that women could provide effective leadership in complex military situations. The pressure was enormous, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge Sarah had been preparing for since the day she decided to pursue SEAL training. The hostage rescue scenario was designed to test every skill candidates had developed throughout BUD/S training. Sarah's team would have to infiltrate a defended position, neutralize hostile forces, locate and secure multiple hostages, and execute an evacuation under simulated enemy fire. The exercise would require precise timing, clear communication, and the kind of split-second decision-making that defined real-world special operations missions. Sarah spent 3 days planning the mission, analyzing intelligence reports, studying facility layouts, and developing contingency plans for every possible complication. She assigned roles based on each team member's demonstrated strengths rather than their personal relationships, ensuring that Brooks, Sullivan, and Martinez would have to perform essential functions regardless of their feelings about following her orders. The night before the exercise, Sarah gathered her team for a final briefing that would set the tone for everything that followed. Looking at the faces around her, some supportive, some skeptical, some openly hostile, Sarah realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but the future of every woman who aspired to serve in elite military units. She was ready for whatever came next. The final exercise began at 0 dark 30 on a foggy Thursday morning that seemed designed for clandestine operations. Sarah stood with her team at the edge of a mock village that had been constructed specifically for advanced training scenarios, checking her equipment one final time while running through the mission plan that would determine her future as a Navy SEAL. The target facility was a three-building complex surrounded by defensive positions and patrolled by instructors playing the role of hostile forces. Intelligence reports indicated that 6 hostages were being held in different locations throughout the complex, with unknown numbers of guards and an alarm system that would trigger massive reinforcements if activated. Sarah's mission was to infiltrate the facility, neutralize all hostile forces, secure the hostages, and execute a clean extraction within a 40-minute window. Failure would result in simulated hostage deaths, team casualties, or capture, any of which would mean automatic failure for the exercise and serious questions about her readiness for advanced training. But the technical challenges of the mission were secondary to the human dynamics Sarah faced within her own team. Brooks, Sullivan, and Martinez had maintained their cold professionalism during mission planning, but Sarah could feel their skepticism and resentment like a weight pressing down on every decision she made. During the final equipment check, Sullivan questioned her choice of breach charges for the main assault. Martinez suggested alternative rally points that would complicate the extraction timeline. Brooks raised concerns about radio protocols that had already been established and rehearsed. Each challenge was technically reasonable, but clearly designed to undermine Sarah's authority and create doubt about her tactical judgment. Sarah addressed each concern with calm professionalism, explaining her reasoning and demonstrating that she had considered the alternatives her teammates suggested. But she also recognized that this was more than a discussion about tactics. It was a test of her leadership under pressure and her ability to maintain team cohesion despite personal conflicts. "I understand your concerns," Sarah told her team as they prepared to move out. "But we've rehearsed this plan thoroughly, and we all know our roles. Once we cross that line, we're committed to executing the mission as briefed. I need to know that everyone is prepared to follow orders without hesitation." Brooks looked directly at Sarah for the first time since Morrison's arrest, his expression revealing the depth of his reservations about her leadership. "Just remember that if this goes wrong, we all pay the price for your decisions," Brooks said. "This isn't about proving a point anymore. It's about demonstrating that you can actually lead people in life or death situations." Sarah met Brooks' gaze with the same steady confidence she had maintained throughout months of harassment and doubt. "You're right," she replied. "That's exactly what this is about. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." Sarah led her team across the starting line at precisely 0400 hours, beginning an infiltration approach that would take them through nearly a kilometer of varied terrain before reaching the target facility. The route Sarah had chosen avoided obvious approach vectors, but required precise navigation and timing to avoid instructor patrols that were designed to intercept teams that made navigational errors. The first phase of the mission proceeded flawlessly. Sarah's navigation was perfect, her timing precise, and her team's movement disciplined and quiet. They reached their final observation post, overlooking the target facility with minutes to spare, allowing time for a final intelligence update before beginning the assault phase. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the guard positions, patrol patterns, and defensive preparations that would determine the success or failure of her mission plan. Everything matched her expectations based on intelligence reports, confirming that her tactical analysis had been accurate and that her team was positioned for success. But as Sarah prepared to initiate the assault phase, she noticed something that hadn't appeared in any intelligence report: additional defensive positions that suggested the instructors had modified the scenario to create unexpected complications. A less experienced leader might have proceeded with the original plan, hoping that the changes were minor enough to overcome through execution. A more cautious leader might have called for a mission abort, prioritizing safety over mission success. Sarah chose a third option that demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical flexibility that special operations required. She quickly modified her mission plan, reassigning team roles to account for the additional defensive positions while maintaining the timing necessary for mission success. It required her teammates to trust her judgment completely, accepting new assignments without the benefit of detailed rehearsal or preparation. "Brooks, you're taking Overwatch position Bravo instead of Alpha," Sarah whispered over the team radio. "Sullivan, you're shifting to Breach Point Charlie. I need suppressive fire on the northeast guard tower instead of direct assault. Martinez, you're with me on the primary breach, but we're going through the west wall instead of the main entrance." Each change was tactically sound and addressed the new intelligence, but implementing them required her team to abandon their carefully rehearsed plans and follow her leadership into an improvised assault. It was exactly the kind of test that revealed whether a team trusted their leader enough to follow orders that seemed risky or unconventional. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Sarah wondered whether Brooks, Sullivan, and Martinez would choose to follow her orders or whether their reservations about her leadership would cause them to hesitate at the critical moment. Brooks was the first to respond, his voice carrying none of the skepticism he had shown during mission planning. "Overwatch Bravo understood. I have eyes on the northeast tower and I'm ready to provide cover." Sullivan and Martinez confirmed their new assignments with equal professionalism, and Sarah realized that her teammates had made a decision to trust her tactical judgment regardless of their personal feelings. It was exactly the kind of battlefield leadership moment that couldn't be faked or rehearsed. Either people trusted your judgment when everything was on the line, or they didn't. Sarah initiated the assault at exactly 04:15 hours, leading her team into a carefully choreographed attack that demonstrated everything they had learned throughout BUD/S training. The modified plan worked perfectly, with each team member executing their reassigned roles with precision that impressed even the instructor observers who were evaluating the exercise. Brooks's suppressive fire kept the northeast guard tower neutralized while Sarah and Martinez breached the west wall using charges that created exactly the right size opening without triggering structural collapse. Sullivan provided security during the breach, eliminating simulated hostile forces with the kind of accuracy that marked him as an expert marksman. Once inside the facility, Sarah led her team through a systematic clearing operation that located and secured all 6 hostages within 22 minutes, well ahead of the mission timeline and fast enough to avoid simulated reinforcements. Each room clearance was textbook perfect, each hostage location secured with minimum force and maximum efficiency. But the most critical part of the mission was still ahead. Executing a clean extraction while protecting 6 hostages and maintaining team integrity required the kind of coordination and leadership that separated successful special operations from disasters that resulted in casualties and mission failure. Sarah's extraction plan called for her team to move through a series of rally points while maintaining security for the hostages and providing mutual support against pursuing forces. It was complex enough to test everyone's ability to execute multiple tasks simultaneously, while simple enough to avoid confusion under pressure. The extraction proceeded flawlessly until the final rally point, where Sarah's team encountered an unexpected complication that threatened to turn mission success into catastrophic failure. Martinez, who had performed brilliantly throughout the assault phase, stumbled during a night movement and suffered what appeared to be a serious ankle injury. In a real-world situation, the injury would have required immediate medical attention and potentially compromise the entire team's ability to reach the extraction point. Sarah faced a decision that would test everything she had learned about military leadership. She could abandon Martinez and continue the mission with the hostages and remaining team members, ensuring mission success at the cost of leaving a teammate behind. She could abort the extraction and risk hostage casualties while attempting to treat Martinez's injury. Or she could find a way to modify the plan that accomplished both objectives despite the unexpected complication. Brooks and Sullivan looked to Sarah for orders, their expressions revealing that they understood the gravity of the situation and the difficulty of the decision she faced. The hostages, played by instructors who were evaluating every aspect of team performance, waited silently while Sarah processed her options and made the choice that would define her leadership capabilities. Sarah chose to demonstrate the principle that special operations teams never leave teammates behind, regardless of mission parameters or external pressure. "Brooks, you and Sullivan continue to the extraction point with the hostages," Sarah ordered. I'm staying with Martinez to provide medical assistance and call for emergency extraction. It was a decision that prioritized team loyalty over mission success. Exactly the kind of choice that revealed someone's core values when everything was on the line. In special operations, technical competence was essential, but moral courage was what separated true leaders from people who simply held leadership positions. Brooks started to protest, clearly concerned about leaving Sarah and Martinez behind with potential hostile forces still in the area. "That's not the mission plan," Brooks said. "Your job is to get everyone to the extraction point, not to split the team when we're this close to success." Sarah looked at Brooks with complete certainty about her decision. "My job is to take care of my teammates," she replied. "Mission success doesn't mean anything if we abandon the principles that make us worth following." Sullivan stepped forward to support Sarah's decision, demonstrating the kind of unit cohesion that every military leader hoped to inspire. "Brooks and I can't handle the hostage extraction," Sullivan said. "You take care of Martinez and get him home safe." It was exactly the kind of response that revealed how Sarah's leadership had influenced her teammates thinking about their responsibilities to each other. Even teammates who had initially resented her presence were now willing to follow her example of putting team welfare ahead of personal success. Sarah spent the next 15 minutes providing emergency medical care for Martinez while coordinating with exercise controllers for an emergency extraction. Her medical training, learned from watching her mother work in emergency rooms, proved sufficient to stabilize Martinez's injury and ensure that he could be safely moved. When the exercise officially ended 40 minutes after Sarah had led her team across the starting line, every hostage had been successfully extracted, every team member had returned safely, and Sarah had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that the Navy SEALs valued most highly. Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah as she was completing her post-mission equipment check, his expression revealing satisfaction with what he had observed throughout the exercise. "Outstanding mission planning, excellent tactical adjustments under pressure, and exactly the right decision regarding your injured teammate," Chief Rodriguez said. "You demonstrated every leadership quality we look for in special operations personnel." Sarah felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she had experienced during her military career, but she was more interested in her teammates' responses than in official recognition. Brooks was the first to approach her after the formal debrief, his expression showing none of the skepticism or resentment that had characterized their relationship since Morrison's arrest. "I owe you an apology," Brooks said simply. "I let my feelings about the Morrison situation influence my judgment about your capabilities as a leader. What you did tonight, both the tactical leadership and the decision about Martinez, show me exactly what kind of person you are." Sullivan and Martinez expressed similar sentiments, acknowledging that their initial resistance to Sarah's leadership had been based on assumptions rather than evidence. More importantly, they committed to supporting her throughout the remaining phases of SEAL training, regardless of whatever external pressure or controversy her presence might generate. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chun graduated from BUD/S training as the first woman to successfully complete the program and earn the right to continue in advanced SEAL training. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior officials from throughout the Naval Special Warfare community, media representatives, and family members who had watched Sarah's progress with everything from pride to concern. Sarah's parents, who had initially been horrified by her decision to pursue military service, stood in the audience with expressions of profound respect for what their daughter had accomplished. They had watched her transform from a quiet teenager who preferred books to conflict into a warrior who could lead teams through complex operations while maintaining the moral principles they had taught her. During the graduation ceremony, Sarah was presented with an award for outstanding leadership during training, recognition that her performance had exceeded the standards expected for candidates entering advanced programs. But the most meaningful recognition came from her 18 surviving classmates, who presented her with a plaque that read, "To Sarah Chun, leader, teammate, SEAL." In her brief acceptance speech, Sarah addressed the broader implications of her success while acknowledging the people who had made it possible. "This isn't just about one woman completing SEAL training," Sarah said. "This is about proving that excellence has no gender, that leadership comes from character rather than assumptions, and that America's military is strongest when it includes the best people regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Sarah looked out at the audience, seeing faces that represented every possible opinion about women in special operations, and continued with the quiet confidence that had carried her through months of extraordinary challenges. To the women who will come after me, I want you to know that the path is open and that you belong here as much as anyone else. To the men who will serve alongside future female operators, I want you to know that we're not asking for special treatment or lower standards. We're asking for the chance to prove our worth through performance. Sarah paused, thinking about Morrison and the prejudices that had driven his campaign against her, but also about the teammates who had ultimately chosen to judge her based on her actions rather than their assumptions. And to everyone who doubts whether women can meet the demands of special operations, I have only one thing to say. Judge us by our results, not by your fears. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, representing not just recognition of Sarah's individual achievement, but acknowledgement of the broader change she represented for America's military. 3 months later, Sarah Chun became the first woman to complete advanced SEAL training and earn the right to serve in an operational SEAL team. She was assigned to SEAL Team 7, where she would spend the next 6 years participating in classified operations throughout the Middle East and establishing a service record that would influence military policy for decades. But Sarah never forgot the lesson she had learned during her confrontation with Morrison, that the greatest battles aren't always fought against foreign enemies, but sometimes against the prejudices and limitations that people place on each other. Her victory wasn't just about becoming a Navy SEAL. It was about proving that courage, determination, and excellence could overcome any obstacle placed in their path. Years later, when young women approached Sarah for advice about pursuing careers in special operations, she would tell them about the night she broke Morrison's legs and changed military history. Not because violence was the answer to discrimination, but because sometimes the only way to gain respect was to demonstrate strength that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. They thought I was weak because I was quiet, Sarah would tell them. They thought I would break under pressure because I didn't look like their idea of a warrior. But strength isn't about how you look or how loud you talk. It's about what you do when everything is on the line and people are counting on you to do the impossible. Sarah Chun had done the impossible, and in doing so, she had opened doors that would never close again.